Indian cinema. In a famous BBC documentary, I remember a line that there are three elements which unite Indians. India, a country known more for its diversity than for its democracy or anything. And these three are cricket, politics, and movies or Indian cinema. Such is the impact of Indian cinema on the life of people that it is no longer and it was never only a source of entertainment, but Indian cinema was in many ways a mirror which showcased what was existing at that time. It was an aspiration of the youth. It reflected what India aspires to be, what are the challenges and also the stress. So in Indian cinema, we find all these different hues. And how did this tradition emerge? The tradition of motion pictures, as it is said in technical jargon. How did the tradition of motion pictures emerge from a country which was known for its theatre? Let us understand very basics and then we will get into. Because recently I was reading a special commemorative edition on Satyajit Ray. So we'll be discussing Satyajit Ray also and how he redefined along with Guru Dutt, along with Bimal Roy, along with Raj Kapoor, the dimensions of cinema. And how is cinema seen in the present times when we see that it is no longer confined to theatre, especially in the COVID times when we talk about OTT. And what are the challenges and also not only for the producers, for the makers, but also for the public when it comes to OTT also. Speaking of the evolution of Indian cinema, speaking about the evolution of Indian cinema or the introduction of Indian cinema, when did it start? Then we can say that Indian cinema which is very popular, which is produced in various languages. We have different industry. We have Tollywood in South, we have Tollywood of Bengal. And the cinema in India is segmented by language. So for example, in 2019, the Hindi film industry is represented 44% of box revenue collection, followed by Tamil Nadu, the Telugu, and also the Malayalam film industry, which is also doing very well in its own. So definitely Indian cinema is not only about Bollywood, certainly not about Bollywood. It is more about the diversity, and diversity is not only of language. If you see the movies in different regions of India, then they have a characteristic flavor. For example, in Bengal, in the Bengal Tollywood, you will find element of classicism. We'll find classicism in the Bengal film industry. We find heroism, something which existed from the megalithic times, a very prominent theme in Tamil Nadu. In fact, in the Deccan and the peninsular film industry, a lot of emphasis is on heroism. Whereas if you talk about Maharashtra, then in Maharashtra, we find the element of social stress very prominent. And because of this diversity, because of the richness, many a times we find that apart from Hindi, movies from all across India get enlisted in the suggestion for Oscar nominations. So let us go very gradually. So Indian cinema, which is a global enterprise, why? Also because of the Indian diaspora who have taken Indian film industry, the Indian film culture beyond India right from the time of Raj Kapoor, when films were shot in Russia, also reflecting the warmth in relation between the socialist country, Russia, Soviet Russia, and India with a socialist bent, to the present times when we find that many movies are shot outside. Also, we hear that Dangal as a movie earned more revenue in China than in India. So Indian movies are very popular. And also popular because they bring a diversity of theme which is there in India. So we find that Indian movies are reaching all over the world and it is a global enterprise. For example, like the Universal Enterprise of America, the Fox Studios, the Sony Pictures, Walt Disney Pictures, Warner Brothers. So all have seen the immense potential in Indian cinema and they have invested also. So we find that more than 30 film production companies have been listed in the National Stock Exchange. So we can just imagine the amount of revenue they generate on an annual basis. Now, if we talk about the Indian cinema and its history, then we'll have to go back to, I would say, the last decade of 19th century. In the last decade of 19th century, the year was 1896. The year was 1896, and in the Watson Hotel of Mumbai, the then Bombay, the Lumiere brothers and Robert Paul, they for the first time showcased a movie. Cinematography in its commercial way was yet to be introduced, but this was a fair beginning in 1896. Inspired by what happened, and one of the audiences, Save Dada, not only ordered a recording camera, but in 1897, in 1907, we find that a wrestling match which was recorded was showcased. This was the beginning, this was a fair beginning. And it is said that the phenomena from 1896 to 1930 was the silent era. Why silent era? Because motion pictures did not have sound. And in the silent era, we find that different types of themes was there, but predominantly we see emphasis on mythological themes. Again in 1897, we find a film presentation by Professor Stevenson, who started a stage show at Calcutta Star Theatre. The first Indian film released was Sri Pundalik, a silent Marathi film by Dada Saheb Torne in 1912. And then we find that Dhundiraj Govind Phalke, who is the father of Indian cinema, popularly known as Dada Saheb Phalke. So his original name was Dhundiraj Govind Phalke, Dada Saheb Phalke. In 1913, Raja Harishchandra, a silent film in Marathi, was shown for the first time. And in this movie, he employed elements from Sanskrit epics also. So we find that in the silent era, a number of movies were produced, and in these movies, we also find an aspiration of self-strengthening or self-confidence. For example, depiction of the grand etiquette of nobles, talking about rich mythology. All this reflected an aspiration of self-confidence. That is, India did not have a dark cultural past. How did the British react to it? British did not protest or object much. But when more and more movie players from outside began to showcase, there was a threat. Especially in 1917, the British European Association. In 1917, British European Association was very critical of a show, Serpentine Dance, in which the whites were shown in bad light or poor color. Bad light means they were shown as funny elements. So definitely there were occasions in which the British did object to the showcase of certain films. And for us, it was not only a source of entertainment, but also about assertion of self-confidence. Now, this is not to say that India requires independence to make pictures, but definitely there was an aspiration. We find that in 1927, the British government also did promote. So it, on one hand, if it was very cautious, so on the other hand, it was also promoting, because by promoting cinema, the British wanted to showcase the Indians that the British rule in India is also about presenting or improving the quality of life. Recently, I was watching a movie on Sardar Udham, in which, in one of the scenes, the protagonist, Sardar Udham, was having a conversation with Bhagat Singh. And Bhagat Singh was saying that many of the youth in India are happy because of the roads, railways and cinema. So possibly the introduction or the encouragement to cinema was also a tactics by the British to co-opt to integrate the Indians by giving them a lull assurance that British Raj is about happiness. So they wanted justification, they wanted to justify, and possibly because of all this, they wanted to promote the market also. And they were aware that Indians in a state of stress would also be very fond of cinemas, hence it was also a way of earning money. British, they wanted to promote their films over the American ones, and they formed the Indian Cinematography Inquiry Committee. So there was a tussle going on between the American filmmakers and the British filmmakers. We talk of two of the prominent personalities, Ardeshir Irani, the person whom we associate with the first sound motion picture, Alam Ara, and then Swami Kannu Vincent, the theatre turned cinematographer who brought movies to South India to Coimbatore. So we'll discuss about both of them. First of all, about Irani. Irani released Alam Ara, the first Indian talkie which had sound. So he later produced the first South Indian talkie film, Kali Das. Talkie film, when it was introduced, it came with a challenge. Now, with silent movies, with silent pictures, there is no linguistic barrier. Means it can appeal to every section. Whereas with sound pictures, though it is more entertaining, though it is more engaging, but there is a linguistic barrier. So many of the artists, many of the, especially the theatre artists, they frowned upon the idea of introducing, but again, this was more like evolutionary history. Raghu Rai writes that the progress of Indian cinema was also reflecting Charles Darwin theory of evolution, in which despite barriers, despite criticism, the Indian film was developing by leaps and bounds. And it is also very amazing that on one hand we find that the Indians were criticized for their lack of creativity, for their insular attitude to technology. On the other hand, the Britishers also appreciated how quickly the Indians were adopting the technology and the technique of modern filmmaking. Swami Kannu Vincent, who built the first cinema of South India. In fact, this person had introduced the tradition of tent cinema. So earlier, when there were no concrete theatres, there used to be tent cinema. Today also, if you go to fairs especially in rural areas, you would find tents in which if you pay, you go and by peeping through a hole, you get to see some of the motion pictures. That is a reminiscent of that era. And it was this person who introduced the concept. You know, the tent was erected on a stretch of open land to screen films. The first of the type was in Madras in Coimbatore region, known as Edison's Grand Cinema Megaphone, due to the fact that by then electricity was used for motion pictures, projectors. So again, in Swadesh movie also we have seen how a projector was used and people used to come and sit together. So cinema is not only about entertainment, cinema was also a means of social gathering, social cohesion. So in the modern times when we are glued to our individual screen, even in a single family we find that every member of the family has their own individual screen, we find that that personal touch, the social cohesion or the bonding is missing. Whereas in earlier times people used to get free, they used to plan, and then they used to assemble on a particular time of a week, especially in the evening after sunset, and then they used to watch and get entertained. Now from 1931, so we find that from 1931 onwards, when Alam Ara was made, the first motion picture, very soon we also had our first colored film also. So in 1937, Moti B. Gidwani, he presented the first colored picture, that is Kishan Kanhaiya. Now we find that in 1934, just before that, the Bombay talkies had opened. From the word talkies itself, it is clear that we are talking about sound pictures. Prabhat Studio in Pune started production of Marathi films. So we find that in the Indian freedom struggle also, slowly the focus, especially after the shift of capital, the focus of the cultural, I would say, the cultural aspect shifted from Calcutta towards west and south. So Madras and Bombay emerged as prominent center in comparison to Calcutta when we talk about cultural renaissance. So we find the Indian masala film, a term used for mixed genre films that combines song, dance. So masala film, they were fond of dancing. They were fond of singing, something which was introduced in variance in contrast to the Western pictures. And hence this term was given by the Britishers. So for us, watching movies was entertainment. It was about social gathering. It was also about receiving some education and also a form of showcasing our diverse culture. During 1940s, cinema in South India accounted for nearly half. So we find that in South India it was very popular, especially because in South India, in the Madras presidency, we find that the quality of life was slightly better than most of the North Indian British provinces. Now, 1930s, 40s. So after Indian independence, in fact, it is said that we find that the government of India also appointed a commission. So a commission, S.K. Patil Commission, which recommended setting up a Film Finance Corporation under the Ministry of Finance. And the advice was accepted and FFC provided financial support to filmmakers. So those were the times when we did not have a lot of money in our pocket and the capitalist class was reluctant to be film producers. So what started as a government funding project is now creating a lot of revenue in the form of tax, direct and indirect, for the Ministry of Finance. So we know that eventually India became one of the largest documentary film producers. Now, documentary is something which is dealing with a particular topic and is having a very small size. Maybe 1 hour can also be a documentary. So we find that today, every year we have 200 short documentary released in 18 languages with 9,000 prints for permanent film theaters across the country. So these are some of the datas which we can come across. 1950s, 60s, especially after independence, is known as the golden age of Indian cinema. This also saw what is known as the parallel cinema movement. So in the 1950s, 60s, we find social themes are very popular. For example, in regional films like Bengali, which accounted for a quarter of film's output, especially because of the filmmakers Mrinal Sen, Bimal Roy, Satyajit Ray. Later we have Shyam Benegal, Rishikesh Mukherjee. So Bengal, in many ways, these figures are also said or associated with Bengal Renaissance. Why Bengal Renaissance? Because they tried to revive the ancient culture and showcase what was there in Bengal. So we find that not only in Bengal but in South also. For example, we find social themes. So we are talking about social realism or social issues such as landlordism, caste politics, the caste and religion tussle. All this was showcased. For example, Do Biga Jameen, very famous movie, in which the protest against landlordism, Nagrik, youth. We are talking about Neech Nagar, means the stress of migrants, rural migrants in towns who have come for opportunity. Now there was also a very famous movie, Neela Kuil or The Blue Koil. Very famous movie produced around this time in Malayalam, in which we find that a couple is very close but eventually they surrender to the caste politics. So we find that all types of movies were made, but mainly there was on the different type of social stress. Now I would like to remind you that this was also the time when land reforms were going on. This was the time when we find stress with respect to the tribal areas were also seen. Now this golden age also included one of the greatest film critics, directors of that time. South Indian cinema saw the production based of epic Mahabharata, that is Maya Bazar. So a number of prominent works were also made. Shivaji Ganeshan, who was the first actor to revive international award when he won the actor in Afro-Asian. Shivaji Ganeshan, known for his movie Parashakti, a person who crossed the Indian boundaries and made Indian films very popular outside India. So he received the title of Chevalier in the Legion of Honor by the French government in 1995. The angry young man phase of 1970s and 80s. It is said that cinema is also a mirror to the society in any country. Cinema is not only a means of entertainment but also a medium to educate or to reflect the growing concerns of the society. Many times it has been felt that cinema has also acted as a conduit by which the creative managers on behalf of the people attempt to convey a message or a grievance to those who are in positions of power. When we talk about 1970s in India and 1980s, when India had just the Indo-Pak War and liberation of Bangladesh, India was facing an acute unemployment crisis. And why an acute unemployment crisis is because due to investments or initiatives in education over the last 2 decades, a educated middle class had emerged. But the socialist Indian economy did not have enough jobs to cater to the interests or to the demands of this educated youth. It was at this time that India also adopted a increasingly socialist model, especially during the time of Indira Gandhi, who emphasized on nationalization of banks, also on abolition of privy purses of many of the Maharajas, which was promised by Sardar Patel during their integration. So at this time, we see that the Indian cinema in 1970s, when we hear of the Garibi Hatao, when we also discuss of the emergency, India's emergency, which had started due to the students' grievance, due to the prevailing inflation. So India was on the cusp of an economic crisis. The relations between India and US had also hit low, and also because of the 1973 Arab-Israel War. Due to the 1970s Arab-Israel War or the Yom Kippur War, the Arab world had also tightened the sale and export of oil, because of which there was inflation. So at this moment, the middle class, which had a major grievance from the government due to its inability to cater or to address these economic issues which were genuine, we find that the Indian cinema found a protege in the form of Amitabh Bachchan. Amitabh Bachchan, who portrays very beautifully the role of an angry young man, was the next big star, replacing the romantics era of Rajesh Khanna or even Rajendra Kumar, the Golden Kumar. Because now Amitabh Bachchan, with a tall lanky figure, with a stoic attitude and with so much of unresolved grievance but speaking little, this was a reflection of the frustration of the youth. So this era talks about the aspiration also of the youth who want to have a life of rags to riches. Movies like Diwar, movies like Dawn, in which Amitabh Bachchan had an ordinary beginning but then was able to rise in the top echelon of the Indian economy, means the economy in the movie, and also the political structure because of his capability. This was like selling dreams. Definitely not encouraging violence, but it was like selling dreams. One of the reasons why people love in cinema or movies is because it actually alleviates their miseries for those 2.5, 3 hours. And they began to dream. They began to dream. It is also a source of inspiration. While this was a natural outcome, something that was about to happen, we also know that around this time, when emergency was going, I remember a very famous incident happening, that Jai Prakash Narayan, the leader of the anti-Indira faction in the Indian politics during emergency, was to address a mass rally. And then at that moment, Indira Gandhi, to deter the people from participating in the rally, announced the broadcast of the very famous romance movie by Rishi Kapoor, Bobby. But despite this, masses thronged. That reflects the overwhelming influence of JP and also the deep-seated resentment. So people preferred grievance redressal over romance. So we find that this was definitely the angry young men phase of Indian cinema. But another disturbing, or I would say a new trend emerged, was that in the name of creativity, at times eroticism was also, because also of the Western influence, now more and more movies, especially from the time of Raj Kapoor, who began shooting movies in Russia, more and more movies were shot in continental Europe, where there is a different culture, a different dress style. And when this was depicted in the Indian cinema, the censor board came up with the categorization of B-grade movies. Because the censor board always believes that there has to be a balance between creativity and social morality. At times it goes overboard and it infringes into the arena of creativity, but at times it is justified also. And we find that then there was the big hit Sholay of Ramesh Sippy. Sholay was a movie in which the masses could resonate with a number of emotions. Emotions such as anger of Amitabh Bachchan, who was rendered injustice by fate, by destiny, not once but multiple times. Sholay was a reflection of revenge, a story of revenge on multiple counts. So we know that. And Sholay was also a movie which celebrated the fusion or the cultural diversity of India. So the story of the old man who lost his only son, a Muslim ulema, being supported by the predominant Hindu population in the Ramgarh village, is also a celebration of Indian diversity. That in times of crisis, people, irrespective of their religious background, come together. So, because of these multiple emotions which were reflected in the movie, and definitely the direction, the acting, and the plot, the movie became an instant hit. Even today, it remains to be one of the most sought after Bollywood cinemas. After 1970s and 80s, we see the new phase of romantic movies, especially which were shot abroad. The era of the Khans, especially Shah Rukh Khan, Amir Khan, and Salman Khan. So we find that now in 1980s, when Ramayana and Mahabharata, it made people glued to the television screen, emerged movies centered around family drama. With improvement in conditions of life and with the rise of nuclear family, especially due to migration, the strain between nuclear family and a joint family system was the central plot of many of the movies. So it was not a very smooth transition for a youth or for a youth couple to shift from a rural joint family system or even in an urban setup to have its own nuclear family. So we find that all these type of movies and some movies based on social issues such as trade unionism, strikes, and then the Bombay blasts. The Bombay blasts of 1993, which not only rocked entire Indian subconscious, this was also the theme of many of the movies. India woke to the terror of a new threat in the form of state-sponsored terrorism. So in 1980s and 2000, we see a rich gamut of movies ranging from romance movies shot abroad in countries such as Switzerland with a beautiful natural landscape, and then dark movies where the depiction of the impact of the Bombay blasts and also the, I would say, Babri Masjid demolition and the increasing tensions between Hindu and Muslims, 1992 Babri Masjid, the increasing tensions between Hindu and Muslim resulting in a number of riots was also depicted. We also find that now the entry of large houses in the form of producers in the post LPG phases. So the budget of the movies increased. More and more payment and more technology was introduced like Dolby sound system, better cameras, and dedicated professionals from ranging from the action directors to choreographers. They were employed, even to the movie editors. When we talk about the technological intervention in movies, we are also talking about the advent of three-dimensional movies. My friend Kutti Chatan, the first movie in 3D mode was shot in Malayalam. And then that was the time when India was integrated to the global economy, to the global society. Hence, there was also increasing demand for notable foreign movies, which was dubbed in local languages and was seen with much enthusiasm by Indian populace. One of the movies was the great Titanic of James Cameron, which bagged 11 Oscars, which was as popular as any of the Bollywood movies. So we find that this time the people also were fascinated by the Western movies. If we talk about the present times, when we talk about the present times, especially in the COVID era, we are in the time when over-the-top services. Now, what is over-the-top? Over-the-top services like Netflix, Z5, Amazon Prime, what they do is that they pick up the content from a television channel or directly from the producers and showcase it. So it is just a platform in which various content is shown. But OTT has also evolved from just being a medium for displaying various content to also showcasing its original products. So now we see that Netflix and Amazon Prime, especially Netflix and Amazon Prime, they were the pioneers in introducing their own system and their own Netflix series So we have developed a culture of binge watching. So they have also emerged as the sponsors of various shows and even cinemas. We find that now there is a shift from a movie to a web series. Web series consisting of multiple episodes, unlike the earlier time when the soap opera were displayed, they were broadcasted on particular days of a week and people had to wait. Now you have the option of satiating your curiosity by watching it all at one go or in different phases. And we find the large use of VFX is a part of most of the movies, which gives a very beautiful image of or display VFX. When we find that artificial backgrounds are created, we find that artificial backgrounds are created in VFX, for example having a green and then juxtaposing it with whatever background you want. We also find that nowadays there is a conflict between OTT service providers and the government, especially with rise to regulation of content on OTT. So OTT resists from being regulated by the censor board. We find the re-emergence of parallel cinema. What we say is a parallel cinema, as I have already discussed earlier, parallel cinema is a cinema which is not made from commercial point of view. So especially in OTT, which has given a great scope for creativity, we see the emergence of parallel cinema, especially because the cost of production and distribution has tremendously reduced. And this has allowed many creative directors, story writers to exhibit their product. So we definitely see that OTT has democratized. It has democratized the entertainment industry. Yes, it has its own challenges, but we have to see the positive side. If you talk about the challenges, then definitely there are issues with respect to regulating access of the content, especially for teenagers, for adolescents and also for the children.